entirely through alternatives is you lose the universality of the UN. Now, when does the UN work best? When there's an enormously effective civil society lobby which is working in parallel with it and reinforcing it. So I think conferences which start to apply direct pressure on this issue is key, but I think we would be kidding ourselves if we felt there was, an alternative. We've got to go on fighting both outside but also inside these institutions, and I think that's the only point we differ on. But as an advocate of engagement, I realize I've also got to have my red lines, and engagement must not become appeasement.
Mr. Minister, as a German parliamentarian, I would underline that my country is taking a similar view, and we should then act under the leadership of the Czech Republic, is now the President of the European Union, to find out in what way the European Union, as one body, could act then in common. So this is one of the points I would like to raise. Is there any chance to put a different or asking a different question dealing with the Bretton Woods institutions, because we do have here in London the summit in the end of March or beginning of April, and one of the things that we are seeing is that anti-Semitism has something to do with downturn in economy. So in this regard, I would like to get a view or an indication in what way do you think about the reform of the global financial institutions, and in what way parliamentarians could be helpful in this.
Well, I'm glad to say you're speaking to the right man, because I amongst other responsibilities, am the Prime Minister's envoy for the G20, so that's what's called a softball question, which I appreciate getting. I always feel guilty if I leave any meeting without having made a pitch for the G20, so thank you. Let me just very simply say I think that nobody has yet fully taken account of the potentially dramatic political and social consequences of this downturn. The impact on the rates of growth across the whole developing world, are at least as dramatic as here, because others may not fall into negative growth, but for a country like China to go from 8 or 9% to 2 or 3 or 3 or 4% is a huge strain on its political system, which has been built on the assumption of growing annual prosperity, and a huge number of developing countries are indeed falling into negative growth rates. So, the power of these financial institutions to help address that is key. And it is certainly our hope that at the summit there will be a very strong rescue plan, if you like, for developing countries, both middle income and poor, which will try to use these institutions to substitute for their lost access to commercial credit markets, and will make sure that their basic social needs continue to be met, as well as securing investment in public infrastructure and other job-creating mechanisms. In other words, the same kind of packages our own countries are adopting, we want to make sure are available to developing countries who don't have their own resources or fiscal tools to do it on their own. And the more we put more resources through these institutions, the more the limitations of their governance and operations become clear. The governance issue, that they are not seen as having a big enough ownership stake from developing countries. The operational issue, that they, at the same time that we're all busy stimulating our economies, are still preaching balanced budgets to many developing countries. So there's a huge amount of change in the governance, financing and operations of these institutions which needs to be addressed, and I think a lot will get done at the G20. There will be a report on the IMF, but it's part of a continuing process which will probably take a year or so to really retool these organizations for the role they now need to play.
I'll take one question from our experts group. David Harris. Mr. Malik-Brown, if I may, with respect, follow up on the question posed by Congressman Chris Smith, in particular with regard to U.S. participation on the Human Rights Council. I serve, in addition to my role at the American Jewish Committee, as the co-chair of United Nations Watch. And it's my impression that the U.S. position at the Commission before the Council was in part determined by what it believed to be the lack of political courage, if I can put it frankly, on the part of some of our allied nations in regard to confronting the kinds of issues that Congressman Smith addressed. For example, while the United States was on the Commission, as you know, there was a separate agenda item number 8, dedicated solely to Israel. When the United States attempted to remove this agenda item year after year, it found few nations willing to confront the Arab League and the OIC because of the political consequences. My impression, therefore, is that the new U.S. administration is prepared to engage Geneva, read both Durban and the Human Rights Council, but frankly needs to know whether our allied partners, particularly the European Union, are prepared when necessary to show, if I may, the political spine to confront rather than compromise, which has been the traditional modus operandi for too many of our friends, which I think has led to the frustration by the United States, whether Democrats or Republicans, with the process. Forgive my candor, but this is a rare opportunity to engage with you, and I welcome your reply.
Well, around the rest of this room, because, I completely, as an old UN man, I always sort of balk slightly when we use this term, the UN, because, as you know very well, and as that statement implied, it's really the will of the member states of the UN which determine outcomes. The UN is a convener. It's not got some independent will and conscience of its own. I think that's exactly the kind of demand the US should make to those of us who want to see the US come back, which is the US coming back has to mean a upturn in the quality of human rights decisions in that body. And that means that not just we, the Europeans, are prepared to commit, but we're prepared to go out and proselytize and canvass and build a coalition. And as I've said, I think that in Africa and Latin America, and Africa's it's a swing vote, and it's not in the right place on this issue, it is on some other human rights issues, we need to go out and build that coalition of support. And we need to also recognize that the OIC is an organization which 5 or 10 years ago, I bet even in this room, nobody would really have heard of. And it has been coming more and more powerful, partly because, in a sense, we've ceded the battlefield to it. And it's a very large organization now. Countries that have very small Muslim minorities are members of it, and on many issues take voting direction from it. So, we've got to address that too. We've got to engage the OIC and, take the battle to them as well. And I think it's a battle at two levels. It's to fight back, but it's also, to get at the Muslim values of tolerance and liberalism and understanding of other faiths too, and prevent the OIC, or if it wishes to, expose the OIC as a promoter of these hardline positions and challenge it to change in the name of tolerance. But at the moment, we're off the battlefield. Too much European pusillanimity and American absence has meant we've handed the field to others.
Netherlands.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the Minister for his very inspiring words. I think you made a very good point by stating that Eleanor Roosevelt initiated the Human Rights Council, and that's why I want to make a plea here today, and I would like to hear